Welcome to Leadership Class Live, Resiliency During Times of Change. I'm Paul Danczyk, Director of Executive Education for the University of Southern California's Selfreflection School of Public Policy. Today, we're excited to have LaVonna Blair Lewis present on empathy, ways to support the other. Next week, Thursday, June 11th at 1 p.m., Frank Serenian will present on ethics and resiliency. This will be the last session of the series. Before introducing LaVonna, a few housekeeping items. Sessions will be recorded and links sent out. Feel free to share the recordings with those within your networks. Enter all questions into the chat box. Participants will be muted for the duration of the lecture. We're expecting an intimate group today, so feel free to unmute and join the conversation a little later on. We recommend that you use your raise your hand feature in participant reactions if we're not able to see you directly. Now onto our main event. LaVonna Blair Lewis is the Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion and teaching professor for the University of Southern California Selfreflection School of Public Policy. Her research interests focus on cultural competency and healthcare needs of underrepresented communities. When not challenging us to expand our perspectives, she can be found on the beach or with her fur baby. LaVonna, empathy sounds so easy. Why is it so hard?
Thank you, Paul, for that great introduction. Great question, and hopefully by the end of the session, we'll be able to dive a little deeper into it. I want to start by saying that for those of you who don't know me, which is most of you, I feel I exist on the planet for two reasons. I live to make the invisible visible. I'm very interested in the importance of values, diversity, those in terms of how people engage. And I'm also very comfortable making other people uncomfortable, which I think is why I ended up in my current position. And again, this idea of helping people to have the conversations that they really don't want to have, but are necessary if we're going to come out on the right side of our current condition. And so this is my agenda for today. I'm going to go through it quickly. It will be interactive, so hopefully you have come with the willingness to share because it is in terms of, I think, sharing those stories that allows us to move the needle forward. And so again, thank you all for joining us or joining me this afternoon. And so I want to just kind of open up with these two ideas. As you can see, it's very text heavy, but I think the main issue has to do with the text that's been bolded. We do have an empathy deficit. That's a statement from former President Barack Obama several years ago at a commencement speech. But again, I think that the second definition is really about othering. This idea that since we're unable to put ourselves in other people's shoes, the consequences are that we spend most of our time thinking about an us-them framework. And so the recognizing that because of putting myself in the main category and everybody else on the outside, what really happens is that we have to recognize that a whole host of the conflicts that we're seeing kind of present day can be linked to our willingness to, again, put other people on the outside. And so this is, I think, important for us to think about. All of us, the 20 plus, close to 30 of us who are in this space right now, we have something in common. It may just be the fact that we're on this platform right now and we have the technology that gives us the capacity to connect over an online platform. So we have that in common. There may be someone on the line who is from Oklahoma or someone who's from Northern California. We have that in common, so it's similar. So I say that to say empathy begins with my willingness to look for some common ground, right? So long as I think that I don't have anything in common with the other people that are in this space, it's going to be very difficult for us to have any type of relationship. Once we've got something that we can talk about in common, maybe we went to the same university, maybe we share a friend in common. Part of what I'm trying to figure out now is how many of my differences can you handle, right? Can I be fully me in your presence, or is the fact that I have significant differences going to be an issue? I can't see all the faces, so I don't know how many other 60-year-old Black women from Oklahoma with bachelor's degrees and PhDs are on the line. But I'm telling you that I fully embrace all of those parts of my identity. And so I like to be fully present. And so if you want to understand me and walk in my shoes, understand that that's the space or the geography that I maintain and that I hold. Again, I think it's important that people really understand that without comfort in terms of sharing those differences, building relationships is not going to be just difficult, it's going to be nearly impossible. And it becomes even more complicated when we add these additional people to the mix, recognizing that, again, the things that we all have in common as the numbers increases may get smaller and smaller, but there has to be someone that's willing to force people to find those spaces, because if we don't, again, I tell people all the time, you know, I make people uncomfortable, and I'm good with that, but it's not uncomfortable to the degree that people want to escape. It's uncomfortable to the degree that people want to find out what is it about this conversation that's making me uncomfortable. And often it is this idea that, I want you to understand the consequences of those differences for people that aren't you. The conversations that we're having right now as a society, I mean, and not just the United States, but globally, have to do with the fact that we have not done justice to this idea that differences matter. And so you get to these kinds of issues, right? We have people who in their mind's eye really believe that they treat everybody the same, right? I don't see color, I don't see age, I don't see disability, I just see people. And even if that is true, the bottom line is that that really doesn't help people who are significantly different. If you say you want everybody to see the game and you give everybody a box, well, you haven't helped everybody. Some people didn't need the box, and the people that did need the extra accommodations didn't get it. And that's where we get to equity. Equity means that I understand those differences, and again, I'm doing what I can to make some accommodations to address those differences, right? So you've gone from some person not needing a box at all, the one in the middle needing a single box, and the other needing 2 boxes. So boxes may be education, boxes may be social support, whatever. It's recognition that, again, for full inclusion of different populations, there has to be the appropriate accommodations. And that last box is kind of where we're having our conversation right now. People who don't want to see that we have structural deficits in this society that systematically disadvantage some groups over others really can't see what we're trying to do is tear down the wall altogether, so that my ability to participate isn't being kind of controlled by what's happening because of policies and practices that may predate me, but are still disproportionately impacting me. And so again, I use a very broad definition of diversity because, again, I'm trying to do what I can to make sure that people don't feel like, well, that's just not my issue. Well, if it may not be your issue if you're a person of color, but maybe it's an issue if you're a female or a gender non-binary person, or maybe a person with a disability, or maybe someone that's older or someone that's younger that may also face differences that may kind of influence their ability to fully engage. And it's this idea that those things that differentiate us have to be addressed. What those differences are may vary by geography, but the bottom line is that our conversation around empathy means that I'm spending some time trying to figure out what are the differences that make a difference in terms of my ability to engage in authentic ways with the people that I meet in the institutions that I habitate. Because without understanding those differences, again, people will spend their entire tenure in some organizations feeling like the outsider. Maybe not intentionally, but again, at this point, it's not about intentionality. We're talking about impact. And so this is my identity, right? I am LaVonna Lewis, as I've already said. I identify, well, I'm Black. I'm female in terms of sex. Gender identity is woman. I am currently able-bodied, although the university says I have a disability because I have a chronic health condition. I am middle class, having moved up from being poor growing up, but again, to recognize that that last bullet in terms of education was the lever for me to kind of move up. I am Christian, I'm also straight. And so what I want us to understand again is this idea of going back to differences and similarities. Understand that people are trying to figure out, when we talk about who we are, can we be honest, right? It's like I joked about coming on. We were talking about, I wonder if it's going to be easier to have this conversation or tougher to have this conversation, because it was scheduled for last week and we pushed it back. But things have only escalated in terms of our ability to address this issue of identity and what that really means. People are asking folks to look at the world through their eyes. And again, our ability to do that in kind of concrete ways, effective ways, is going to be very, very important. And so I'm going to stop right now. And actually, I have a set of poll questions that I want everybody to answer. And so Daniel, and there are 4 in a row. And so I'm going to ask Daniel to post those. And again, we're going to ask for your answers. And please fill in your responses. I won't ask you to do anything that I haven't done myself. So are they doing the poll?
Yeah, LaVonna, they're doing the poll, and I'm just going to read the poll questions for those
Okay,
that are
sorry.
at a later time. So
Okay.
Question 1 is, have you experienced being ignored, overlooked, or your opinion minimized due to specific demographic factors? Question 2, have you experienced being treated as if you were less intelligent or felt others expecting your work to be inferior due to a specific demographic factors? Question 3, have you experienced being excluded from activities or overtly avoided due to specific demographic factors? And question 4, have you experienced being asked inappropriate, personal, or probing questions about your religion, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age? And LaVonna, it looks like we're about halfway for people voting with our group, so we'll just give it another minute.
Thank you. And again, please cast your votes. Again, this won't be carried forward any place, but again, I think it just sets the context for the rest of the conversation.
So LaVonna, I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll, and I'll read the question along with the results so those viewers will know what they are. So for our question 1, have you experienced being ignored, overlooked, or your opinion minimized due to specific demographic factors? Yes at 87%, no at 13%. For question 2, have you experienced being treated as if you're less intelligent or felt others expecting your work to be inferior due to specific demographic factors? Yes at, looks like 83%, no at 17%. For question 3, have you experienced being excluded from activities or overtly avoided due to specific demographic factors? Yes at 70%, no at 32%, or sorry, 30%. And question 4, have you experienced being asked inappropriate, personal, or probing questions about your religion, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age? Yes at 70%, no at 30%.
Thank you very much, Paul. And so what do those results tell us? First of all, the good news is that there's not a situation where it always happens or it never happens. And so I say that to say it is a reminder to us who have experienced all of these things in one venue or another, that we're not alone. And I think that's a very important thing to understand. Sometimes we do feel alone, that people don't understand what's going on and that they think these things are figments of our imagination. And for the groups that said, no, it's never happened, now you understand that when folks bring it up, they're just not making it up. It's very common. As we say, it's not universal. But again, for the majority of folks on the session right now, there's a real sense that something about who I am has had consequences for me in terms of, again, when I'm connecting with other people. And that brings me to this, there we go, to this definition of empathy. The ability to step into the shoes of another person, aiming to understand their feelings and perspectives, and to use that understanding to guide our actions. If you've never been skipped over, if you've never been dismissed, if you've never had to take public transportation and so you arrive late for a meeting, you may not be able to empathize with some of the folks that may be your clients, that may be visiting your facilities, to begin to understand how many people want to be seen, how many people want to be known and want to be valued. This idea of looking at looking at the situation from someone else's perspective. If you've always been given the benefit of the doubt, you don't know what it's like to always be seen as the enemy and the one that's done something wrong. If you've always been at the front of the line, you don't know what it's like to the folks who may be at the back of the line. And so empathy says, I wonder what that feels like. I wonder what it feels like when you don't get the benefit of the doubt, and when people are always thinking the worst of you instead of the best of you. And so this idea of pausing and allowing myself to kind of enter that space so that I can think about how, again, how that might feel, how that might fit on a day-to-day basis. Empathy means feeling with experiencing the feelings of another without losing one's own identity. When I say that I want to enter someone else's experiences, I can't do that and leave parts of myself out of the equation. I'm still going to be processing those experiences through my own lens. But empathy says I really want to pause and think about how this might feel, how from another perspective, and to really kind of own it. Not to say that I have to sacrifice who I am to do that, but that I'm acknowledging that there's more than one way of looking at this issue. There's more than one way of seeing what's going on in this space and responding to that. And so I will deal with the elephant in the room. And again, it's like there's been a lot of conversations right now in terms of, the protests. And for me, again, it's like, it's people over property. And again, I know DOG, sorry, DOG agrees with me. And so again, I want people to understand that that's part of the conversation that we're having right now. But again, this idea to kind of think about, how people may be responding to some of the things that they're seeing. And it says to truly empathize, we must strive to understand how another feels from that person's perspective. Again, it's very, as I said earlier, I'm very comfortable making other people uncomfortable. And it makes people uncomfortable to sometimes have to think about other people's pain. But that's what empathy is allowing us to kind of think about. How might someone else lived experience kind of counter what I'm seeing right now? And again, am I comfortable helping someone to kind of lead me through that conversation? And then this is this definition of othering. Those dynamic processes and structures that engender marginality and persistent inequality across any range of human differences. Again, those group identities that I talked about earlier. In the United States, the privileged categories are white, male, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied, and also, again, not too old, because again, we are biased against the elderly, and not too young. We are biased against youth. And so this idea that because of those categories that I have that are part of my identity, I can be treated as the outsider. And so this idea of what do we do with those kinds of distinctions? What are we doing to kind of invite people into particular situations, right? To recognize that We have little control over our various identities. We have even less control over how people respond to those identities. And so that's kind of why this conversation is important. We want people to understand that the cost that we're putting on other people when we constantly see them as the outsider, when we fail to kind of pause and think about what might the world look like through someone else's eyes. I don't know how many parents there are on the line, you know, but Black parents talk all the time about having to have the talk with their kids, and that means I have to talk with my kids so that they'll know how to survive in multiple spaces. And sometimes, again, those spaces may, again, be matters of life and death, and that's kind of where we are right now as a society. And so how does othering manifest itself? It can be subtle, right? Ignoring people's ideas, works, and opinions. As I said earlier, not giving people the benefit of the doubt, failing to share important information. Again, we don't think about the small things that we do that give us the edge. And sometimes that just having access to information is all that it requires. Avoidance, again, you know, it may be something as simple as not inviting people out after work. Or, you know, I was reading the story today about the first Black woman to do a solo exhibit at the Guggenheim Museum, and she wasn't even invited to the launch of the exhibit, right? And they said, oops, you know, we didn't think it was going to be a problem. So avoiding, again, withholding resources, again, this idea of the ability to kind of compete fairly in the kind of current enterprise. And as I said, kind of just excluding people from meetings or social events. So think about it. How many of those experiences do I have to have before I'm really questioning my place in a given organization, in a given space? And again, at kind of where we are right now in society writ large. Now, it's about, you know, 1:25, and I've been doing all the talking. And so now, we're going to put you in some breakout groups, and you're going to do some talking to one another, and then you're going to come back and share with the rest of us. And so I'm going to set this up, and again, I think Daniel's going to post the question in the breakout rooms, but I really want you to kind of think about this question. A friend comes to you after they've been told they've offended someone. They may have said or done something that was considered classist or racist, ageist, sexist, ableist. You pick the ism that you want to address as a group. And then just kind of, how can you make them feel better? And I say that because on the one hand, if people don't feel like that you're caring for their pain at that moment, the teachable moment might be lost, but you really are trying to get them to learn from the experience, right? So what are we doing? Again, for whatever group, pick one of the categories. And for about 7 minutes, I'm going to ask you to talk about it as a group. Some of you, again, may have met folks on this platform previously, but again, just recognize that what you're being asked to do is help educate the rest of us. What would you do in this particular situation, right? You've got to, it's a friend, so it's not someone that you could, it's not someone that you can ignore. It's someone that considers you someone that they can bring their truth to, someone that is concerned with helping them and getting them on the right track. So they're coming to you. Again, what are you going to do to make them feel better? And that's in big capital letters, help them learn from the experience. Because again, I want to make it very, very clear. Oftentimes when someone says that what you've done has offended me, the immediate response was, well, that wasn't my intention. Well, I push back on intentionality because it's about impact. Over cumulative impact, offenses, building time and time again, that has a consequence. And so we want to kind of think about, yes, maybe it wasn't intentional, but we're going to take this and kind of think about, you know, how do we make an impact in this moment? And so hopefully I've given you enough time to get the questions, and now we're going to be getting the breakout groups. Again, my watch says 1:25. I'm going to ask you to come back at 1:32. So have fun. All right, so I'm just going to throw it out there and ask if there's Is there a group out there? So Pat, you have your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we thought that the fact that the person is feeling bad about hurting the other individual, that's a great start, and that an immediate and sincere apology is the first step, and then I think being humble enough to really understand the other individual and the other person and why is it that they're hurt, and just maybe even mediating or facilitating a dialogue between the two would be an effective way of handling this. I think you're muted.
LaVonna, you're on mute.
There you go. So I was saying thank you, Pat, for those comments. Did your group select a particular identity, or did you just basically say this is going to apply across the board?
Just across the board. We were not specific about it.
Okay.
I did make the example of because this situation happened to have happened in a group chat of an internship that I'm in right now, and it was about exactly the whole Black Lives Matter movement and how protests have been getting violent. And so one of the students was a bit arrogant or ignorant in the comment that she made about the violence and the protests. And by the time that I realized that this was happening in the group chat, she had apologized and said that she phrased it wrong and all that. And that is in part what Pat is saying. That I think that when a step in the right direction is to actually acknowledge that you did something to offend someone and not just keep on like, oh no, like you misunderstood or like blah blah, like not trying to kind of keep the offended, but actually acknowledge it. And so that right there, I think, is a brave step. And then obviously, as Pat put it, being open. And I think it was George Bush who just said recently that this is a time to listen, not to lecture. And in part, that's what has to be done in most of these cases, not just in the Black Lives Movement, but also in just this general sense of whatever type of offense that you make in relation to demographics and all that. It's about listening, not lecturing.
So thank you, Camila. I think that was you sharing. I appreciate that. One of the things that is very, very clear is that people are often silent because they fear that they're going to do or say the wrong thing. And some people don't understand that sometimes the silence does more harm. People can fill the silence with a whole host of ideas about what's going on. Again, it's like when these things happen, particularly if they happen publicly, someone is looking for a response. And again, people may not be looking for perfection, but they want to know that they are being seen. Particularly right now, again, this whole idea, as I said, for those of you who may have come on late, I've been in multiple situations where, again, the question goes from very, very quickly from people to property. I would support those people if they weren't burning property. And to me, again, it's like, I won't fight that battle other than to say, is that if you're looking for a reason to do nothing, you can always find one. If you're looking for a reason not to understand generational pain, you can always find one. And so we take it for granted that our ability to respond to what's going on is universally shared, and everybody doesn't have the same resources to be able to respond. Right? It's as simple as what we're going through right now in terms of sheltering at home. or going online with some of our classes. For some people, that was a very easy adjustment. And for some, it was literally safer for them to stay on campus than to try to go back into some of those spaces that they habitate when they're not at school. And so to really begin to kind of understand, I wanna say that emotions are real. So that's why you talk about the feelings. Emotions are real, but the consequences of those emotions are also real. And so that's what you want people to understand. You can say or do the wrong thing and recover from it if you want to. But again, it has to be I think the question, the issue earlier around apology, it's about sincerity and people know the difference. It's about authenticity and people know the difference. And so this idea of trying to enter into those spaces with people, I just talked a lot more than I thought I was going to in terms of that response. But anybody else want to share before I move on?
I'd love to share a takeaway that from our group, if I may.
Sure.
This is something that I got from Martin, one of our, if you don't mind me sharing that. Just as we were leaving the breakout, she made a beautiful case for what I would call self-responsibility. That yes, we do want to look out for each other and support each other and, you know, help each other learn from these experiences. And at the same time, you know, we all have the self-responsibility to, if I say something that's offensive, to lean in and find out how or why. If I may not have understood, or if I might, you know, want to be flippant about it, to use that empathy to dig deeper. So I know I've heard some of my Black colleagues tell me that they're just exhausted trying to explain and educate, you know. So even though I'm grateful for people who take the time and care, I think I just want to share Martin's takeaway that I value, which is it's up to all of us to lean in and ask why. How was it that I offended you?
Exactly, and I thank you for that, Lorraine. But I think the issue of there's a certain humility in terms of being able to engage in this work. This idea of suspending what I know to be true in order to, again, keep myself open for learning. And again, it's like I do what I do because I think people cause harm for one or two reasons. They don't know or they don't care. I'm an educator because I want to deal with as much of the don't know as I possibly can, but the don't care is real. And so I acknowledge that. And so I'm not going to, again, I won't say lose any sleep, but again, I pick my battles. And I think that's the issue, that we're in a space right now where we're trying to engage people in conversations that may be very difficult for them. You know, I've been listening to a lot of folks, and the exhaustion is real. But sometimes the exhaustion comes just in terms of, again, trying to explain why you do it a different way. And it's not just about, it's like I tell people, it's like I'm in the fight and you don't get to vote on how I'm in the fight. So long as I'm fighting for lives, that should be enough. But for some people, it's the purity test, and all of the eggs have to line up. And I think that's a tougher reach. And so I want you to just kind of consider, I saw this quote a few years ago, and it really just stuck with me. If you're in a crowd and look and see that everyone is doing nothing, then nothing becomes the norm, right? The status quo exists for a reason. The easiest thing to do is to do nothing, right? And there's to just go with the flow. And so if you see enough of that, in spite of things that may be very disruptive to everyone that's paying attention, again, you recognize that I'm not gonna rock the boat. I'm just gonna go along with everybody else. And then Joaquin Phoenix, I guess, not necessarily a student of all of his work, but I saw this when he was recognized for his role as the Joker. I don't think anybody wants a handout or preferential treatment. People just want to be acknowledged, appreciated, and respected for their work. And that's a simple statement, but for some populations of people, we feel we have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to get that same acknowledgement, appreciation, and respect. And so to kind of think about, again, what does it mean? What does it mean to show up feeling like that, right? And so to recognize that right now, for a moment, there's the spotlight, but business as usual means that these same issues will go back into where they've always been, the kinds of things that we don't really talk about. And again, there's a couple of references around kind of empathy, and I think these are this is kind of one of the ones that I wanted to kind of introduce, just to kind of get this idea of recognizing that, look, it takes work to make these types of connections, right? I recognize that I'm wired to kind of connect with people. I make a conscious decision that, yes, I'm going to go into this space, even though I don't know where it's going to end up. I'm not afraid to explore other cultures, and again, to kind of think about what does it mean to jump in the deep end, as opposed to kind of just testing the waters on a very superficial level. Conversation is critical, so is active listening. Sometimes it's about what's not being said and our ability to be in tune to what's not being said as well. Using all kinds of vehicles, whether it's arts or other kind of networks to connect. And again, this idea that the status quo, again, doesn't work for everyone, and to really kind of think about what is the next iteration of society. I think a lot of people right now are recognizing that the status quo on so many levels wasn't working for a whole host of populations, and now they're not working all at the same time. And so it's just a question, so what do we do with this kind of new awareness? Do we struggle to go back to business as usual, or do we actively work against those forces that, again, are so locked in and so driven for us? And so just some things just for us to think about in terms of why empathy is so important, particularly right now. This idea of understanding the needs of the people around you. There's a difference between what people want and people need. I think everybody needs to be valued. Everybody needs to be appreciated. Everybody needs to recognize that they're not alone. And I think it's important that in times like this, that's the message that everybody is getting. You're valued, you belong, and you're not alone. And empathy says, I'm going to try to make sure that people get that, because I know all too often that's not, right? You understand, again, what people think in terms of how they see your words and actions. More likely to treat people you care about the way they wish you would treat them. I mean, we talk all the time about the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule says that you do for people what they want done to them, right? Rather than assuming I know, empathy says I'm going to find out what matters to people. Body language, other kinds of things as well. And again, we're not talking about customers necessarily, but we understand, again, that we're providing a service or some benefit, and a customer can be a student, a customer can be someone that we're standing in line with. We're just trying to make a connection. We're able to kind of do a better job in terms of predicting the behavior of folks, hopefully better able to motivate people, because again, we've taken the time to see the world through their eyes. And so again, we're looking for ways to connect in the day-to-day world, those kinds of things that make it more important. You're giving people, again, since you know that you're in a space where people acknowledge different perspectives, you're more likely to share. I mean, it's tough being in spaces where people don't feel safe, right? Because you're not getting honesty. You're not getting authenticity, because in some instances, people have decided that it's just too risky. And so I won't talk about it. Part of the reason why so many people are exhausted is because they're now being asked to talk about things that they've had to swallow for years and maybe perhaps decades. And so this idea of moving forward, a broader perspective, we've already talked about that. And again, there will always be the negativity, but again, it's kind of moving forward, what we want to do it. So if you want to kind of kill empathy, you want to make it dead on arrival, make a practice of not really listening, right? Try to demonstrate a lack of interest and attentiveness as possible. Don't show respect. And again, it's people watch how we treat other people. and they watch how they treat that they're treated, and we're going to see the difference, right? This idea of keep changing the topic, that's what we're having right now. I keep coming back to the, people versus property thing, and it's become less of an issue. But the things that are mobilizing people have to do with basic issues of opportunity and equity. What is motivating people to do other things, again, is a conversation for another day, but it is real. I go back to what I said earlier about people's ability to respond to what's going on with them. I like this because, again, it shows that you may not see everything that's really important. Again, this is COVID-19. We could be talking about the current protests, but to understand that people are looking at life from very different viewpoints. And you know what? Some people have the luxury of choosing to look down and bring up, and other people don't have that same luxury. And so what are we doing to, again, force people to see some of the things that make us uncomfortable? Because, again, we are running from that discomfort often. And I had to put this here because, again, it is the elephant in the room. The service was today. I couldn't do it because, again, I'll just keep moving forward. I think you know why. So this fear of difference is real, and that is what is in our faces right now. Again, not just in the United States, but these things are happening globally. There is a comfort level with homogeneity. I don't have to learn a different script. I know where all the landmines are. We're running from the same playbook. Everything is great. But without challenging this fear and engaging the other, then personal transformation isn't possible, nor is societal transformation possible. Because, again, people are fighting for, in some instances, the past as opposed to what's coming for the future. I think the journey that I'm talking about it requires, hopefully you understand that for me, it is about honest self-reflection. I think all too often we think that we're doing a much better job than we are, or that the other person is the other person is responsible or the problem. That's why things went off the rail. It has nothing to do with me. Honest reflection says, well, as Lorraine said, I lean into what was my part in what just happened, and being willing to accept feedback. Again, I talked about the friend. Everybody has at least one person that they feel that they can be transparent and open with, and being honest in terms of, again, not being defensive and being willing to accept that feedback. And I have to be willing to talk about the things that are important to me. I can't ask you to support me or to show me respect if I don't make it known to you that I have expectations about a respectful relationships. None of us are mind readers, but I think all too often we have this expectations that people know things. I'm an academic, I'm not a psychic. And so I'm really trying to get people to be honest about what's going on, so that, again, we can have an honest conversation about maybe a path forward. And again, I would end with this. If you see something, say something. And by that, I mean, it's like sometimes you're the only one that sees the imbalance in the space. Sometimes you're the only one that sees that some people are consistently not heard. I mean, I can remember very clearly, there was at one point in my career where I would say something and someone else would say this exact same thing 2 minutes later, and it was seen as a great idea and a revelation. It's like, so I'm old enough now to say, you know what, I said that 2 minutes ago. So if anybody's going to get credit, it should be me. Now let's move on. Sorry, that was a LaVonna Lewis moment. I apologize. This is some additional resources for my presentation. And I don't know if there are any questions, but I would be happy to answer them. I went longer than I thought I was going to, so apologize for that.
LaVonna, I just want to thank you for leading us on this conversation today. When we approached you for the series, it was really about self-development and looking at ourselves and thinking about it in terms of resiliency as a broad leadership topic, recognizing to be resilient, there's a lot of different factors that come into play, including increasing our empathy skills. And I want to thank you for your framing today and leading us in this conversation. In the chat feature, there are some comments that are coming through around the breakout sessions, in particular, the questions that you posed to us, and getting to the heart of really trying to understand the other individual, which I think is the heart of your presentation today. By asking different types of questions, the role of apology, for example, certainly also comes into play. There was a question that came around policy issues, and I don't know if that's appropriate in this space or not to talk about policy implications, since we asked you just really to focus on individual development and growth and realizing that policies are totally
you can ask whatever question you want to, whether or not I answer is to be determined.
That's fine. Cool. So since we're an intimate group, feel free to chime in directly with a question. You can either do that by just unmuting your mic and chiming in. If you would like to raise your hand and we can call on you in the order that we see them, and or right into the chat feature, and I'm happy to share it.
So are you guys that always this quiet, or is there a heaviness in the crowd, or what's going on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, it's a little bit quiet. We can hear you. And I'm also mindful of the mic placement on your computer, of just keeping your hands away from it. I have a horrible habit of covering up my mic when I speak, and I'm wondering if that might have been part of that challenge last time.
Okay, is that better?
It is better, yes.
It's because I have to keep a fan on my computer because it just
Oh, gotcha.
Anyway.
Something nice. Yeah.
So LaVonna, what do you think? I'm a white Puerto Rican female, but I am definitely like I've been a victim of racism. Like, but once my nationality is known, not once my skin is seen. Once my skin is seen, I'm suspected to be a normal white person. This happened to me while I was studying in Baltimore, Maryland. But once once the Puerto Rican side of me was disclosed, then I received racism and not like microaggression type of things, like, oh, you speak well for Puerto Rican, or like, oh, you don't look Puerto Rican, oh, you don't look Hispanic. But so my question to you is, me having the privilege of having the white skin, how can I be of better use to the Black Lives Matter movement? I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but I just sometimes feel this real deep sense of guilt, and I don't know if it's like right for me to feel that guilt, but I feel guilty even having to have my white skin, and I know what racism is, but I don't know it to the level that other people know it, where they walk out of their houses and they have a label on them, which is the color of their skin, as simply as that.
So,
and I want to know how better I can help.
So there's a lot there, and I can't unpack all of it other than to say this. There have been a myriad of lists and posts that talk about ways for people to get connected. But the bottom line is that people are looking for folks who honestly believe that there is something fundamentally wrong with the system that is comfortable with some lives being more vulnerable than others. To basically say that, and to be willing to blame groups of people for situations that were intentional, policies and practices. Everybody likes to talk about, well, I don't have slaves. Well, you don't have to have slaves for there to be a legacy of intergenerational transfer of wealth if your family was allowed to accumulate that wealth over time. And so people are looking for folks that are saying, look, do you really want to understand that this is not a side job for some people, it is a full-time job for some people, and that full-time job is survival, right? It's like, I'm on this platform and I have the microphone on this platform, but if I leave my house, I guarantee, if I go shopping in particular areas, there are going to be people that are wondering why I'm shopping in those areas. And it has to do with my Black skin. And so I guess what I'm saying, what people want you to understand is that this is not the result of laziness, lack of effort, lack of vision. It is the legacy of white supremacy. And so if you don't want to deal with that, then you're not ready for this struggle. Do you have to do everything? Do you have to pass a purity test? No. My position now is that if you want to save Black people, I can probably find some way to work with you. If that is not your agenda, then leave me alone, because I'm looking for more people that support my agenda. I don't know if I answered your question, but you know, that's what I got right now. So other questions? I hope I haven't, yeah. Let's see. Other questions?
I raised my hand. This is Jennifer. I wanted to respond a little bit to what Camila was saying, because I also feel like one of the important contributions that we can make if we are not African American is to exactly try to shoulder some of that educational burden by engaging with other people of our own demographic group to help them to better understand the context of what's going on. I, having lived through the LA civil unrest while I was a graduate student at USC, the recent events have brought this home in a very deep and unsettling way, to say the least. And my first reaction was I didn't want to make it about what I was feeling and experiencing. And I simply posted on Facebook, if you haven't already, please, please, please read this book. And I posted a link to The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. So I think encouraging our peers to educate themselves and to try to have that empathy, because you're reading about the deep history, is really important. I also commented on one of my high school classmates' posts where she was complaining about the violence, etc. And I just said, you know, we are so fortunate that we're so privileged that we've never experienced this kind of helplessness and rage. So I think we need to exercise our ability to reach this audience in a way that African Americans cannot always do so, and relieve that burden of education. Sorry for going along so long.
No, I appreciate that. So I teach an undergraduate class, an undergraduate social justice class. And that class always has a range of students, some of whom are first generation and the first people in their family to go to college, and other students whose family could write a $50 million check and never miss it, and everything in between. And so my responsibility is to make everyone in that space, number one, uncomfortable, number two, a contributor to the learning community. And when it's all over, they've been deputized to do with that information whatever they want to do. Because there's a lot of frustration because people believe, going back to the Black exhaustion, people believe that folks should know a lot more than apparently they know. So on the first day of class, I say, you know what, we're going to give each other the benefit of the doubt. If someone says something that is really offensive, don't assume it's their character. Assume they didn't know. Because education, I mean, to say that I should know means that there was a time when you saw me in the classroom or you saw me in a community where I would have gotten that information. But I will say what I said in my presentation. We live in very homogeneous spaces, right? I don't know if it was true, but someone posted the fact that 75% of white people don't have a single friend that's a person of color. And so if that's true, then how can I be, if I was a white person, how would I be expected to know anything about the experience of people of color? And so I'm exhausted, but I'm an educator. And so that means that I must educate people to my truth and the truth of the consequences of the lack of social justice, so that you will quit talking about how one person, just because we had a Black president, racism is over in the United States. People didn't actually just say that, they believed it. And so that's what we're dealing, that's the dynamic. And so when I say I give people the benefit of the doubt, I'll use Drew Brees as an example, since he's on the hot seat right now. He decided that, he was asked, it's like, I don't want to see people kneeling during the national anthem when we go back to play football, right? Colin Kaepernick, people thought maybe, again, it was a chance for him to learn something. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt until I read one of his colleagues say, I sat with him and we had the conversation about these issues. And so he is choosing a side, right? It's one thing to do something because you didn't know. It's another thing to do it because you choose another side. And I'm okay, but until I know which side you're on, I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. Empathy says I'm gonna suspend the fact that you could, it's like I've got students who come from very wealthy Black backgrounds who didn't know anything about indigenous people in the United States until they got to USC. I'm assuming that they were very well educated before they got to USC, but that's assuming that the curriculum for education is adequate, right? I said when I started this presentation, I will have a chance, well, I guess it was before I started the presentation. My last Zoom of the week is speaking to the Black Student Association at Rice University, where I got my PhD, right? And my message to those young people is very, very simple. Number one, Black don't attack Black. It's like, maybe you don't like that person, but right now, do you like me enough that you don't want to see me die, right? That's where I am in this struggle right now. That's the question I need you to answer for me right now. Do you dislike me so much that we can't work together on something, right? Sorry, I figured at some point I would get to this position, but I just want you to understand those are the dynamics that we're dealing with. And it's like, I have the job that I have right now in part because I have learned how to talk about stuff that people don't want to talk about in a way that they at least stay in the room long enough to engage in the conversation. Because the minute they leave, or the minute they say it's not about me, that's not my issue, then the chance for a learning community, the chance for growth, the chance for progress is lost. And so that's what I want people to understand. It's like, are you coming for an authentic engagement, or do you have another agenda? And I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, but once I'm at the point where I don't doubt anymore, I do what I need to do. I either bring you closer in, or I push you back. That's probably more information than you wanted to know, but again, these are very interesting times. I don't know if, as I said earlier, I don't know if I would have been more agitated last week or this week. I think it's probably this week. So just FYI. Any other questions, or have I run some people off?
LaVonna, I want to be mindful of your time, and our participants tend to knock off at about an hour,
Okay.
but really appreciate the conversation today and how real it is. And I appreciate your passion and perspective on not just empathy, but being able to put us into a mindset of what's happening within our society now, and hopefully challenging us to think maybe a little bit different than when we first started this webinar today. I feel like we need to have you back at some point, so don't be surprised if we come knocking on your door again. Before we sign off, closing thoughts.
Well, so if you do have me back, I'll probably address some of those policy questions, because I want people to understand when I say it's intentional, policy is intentional, right? I mean, it's like we can overnight write people in or write people out, and we need to address that issue. And we shall see if we've got the will to do that. My hope is that we move forward and not back. I've been saying for some time now, I was concerned about a civil war in my lifetime. I'm hoping that's not where we are.
Thanks, LaVonna. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today on this topic. And always give us your feedback. It helps us think about future offerings that we might provide through this forum, and realizing it's a way for us to continue to learn together as a larger community. Next week's session is on ethics and resiliency. So be sure to join us next week. It'll be Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific. We recognize that our timing is a little bit off from the first series. So if you can double check your calendars and recognize 1 o'clock Pacific next week on Thursday. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.